Today, exactly half a century after his passing, correspondent Rita Braver looks back on the life and times of our 36th president, Lyndon B. Johnson.
Forget Hollywood political dramas. This real-life truth will give you goosebumps. America was once secretly run by a side chick. Meet the 6-foot-tall goddess who spent 25 years molding Lyndon B. Johnson into the President of the United States, right under his own wife's nose. She didn't care about an official title or money. What she controlled was the fate of an entire nation. But the craziest part isn't the 25-year affair of the century. It's how it ended. The most powerful woman in the shadows delivered the ultimate devastating slap to the president. A woman. Unlike any other, Alice Glass was a woman who was impossible to ignore, possessing a physical presence that immediately commanded attention in any room she entered. She stood nearly 6 feet tall, an extraordinary height for a woman of her era, and her appearance was striking with her pale, milk-white skin and fine blonde hair. People who met her often described her as resembling a cool marble statue, a figure of classical beauty that projected an aura of intelligence and authority rather than simple warmth. While she was widely considered one of the most beautiful women of her time, this beauty was merely the exterior for a mind that was exceptionally intelligent and sharp. She was not just a beautiful woman. She possessed a formidable intellect that made her a powerful force in her own right. Her origins, however, were remarkably humble, standing in stark contrast to the world she would later inhabit. Alice was born in 1911 in the small, dusty town of Marlin, Texas, a hot and insular place where everyone knew each other's business and opportunities for an ambitious young woman were severely limited. Her family was not wealthy, and from a young age, Alice felt that her intellect and her dreams were far too large for the confines of Marlin. Driven by a deep desire for a bigger stage where her talents could be recognized, she made the decisive move to Austin, the state capital, to forge her own path. In Austin, her intelligence quickly earned her a position working for a state senator named William R. Poage, a job that immersed her in the world of politics and power. It was in this environment that her life took a fateful and dramatic turn when she met Charles Marsh. Marsh was not an ordinary man. He was a vastly wealthy and influential newspaper tycoon who owned a powerful chain of publications and was a major political player in Texas. The only complication was that he was already married, but this did not deter him from becoming utterly captivated by Alice. He was completely mesmerized by her combination of beauty, wit, and powerful personality. Marsh's infatuation led him to make an extraordinary gesture, a grand display of his wealth and desire. He purchased 1,000 acres of pristine land in the countryside of Virginia, and there he built a magnificent estate specifically for her, which he named Longlea. This was no ordinary house. Longlea was a colossal white palace, designed in the neoclassical style, complete with towering columns that were reminiscent of the White House itself. The interior was a museum of its own, filled with priceless works of art, a library of rare books, and staffed by a full team of servants. Charles Marsh had constructed an entire kingdom for the sole purpose of winning the affection of Alice Glass. At Longlea, Alice became the undisputed queen of her castle, living a life that blended deep intellectual pursuits with high society influence. During the day, she would lose herself in the vast library, consuming heavy works of philosophy, literature, and history, studying the great ideas that had shaped civilization. By night, she would transform into the perfect hostess, presiding over lavish dinner parties attended by the absolute elite of Washington, D.C. Senators, cabinet secretaries, powerful financiers, and the most important journalists in the country were all regular guests at her table. Alice was never a passive, decorative hostess. In the midst of intense political discussions, she could intellectually outmaneuver the most powerful men in the nation, challenging their arguments with sharp logic and her extensive knowledge, all while maintaining a calm and authoritative demeanor that commanded their respect. She had become a power unto herself, a woman who had created her own world, and that world was about to collide with another force of nature from Texas. The meeting of two hurricanes. In 1937, a young congressman arrived at Longley at the personal invitation of Charles Marsh. His name was Lyndon B. Johnson, and his presence was a stark contrast to the polished and serene elegance of the Grand Estate. He was a newly elected representative from Texas, a tall and lanky man with noticeably large ears and a frantic, almost manic energy that made him seem as if he had not slept for days. He arrived with his quiet and unassuming wife, Lady Bird, but from the very first moment he laid eyes on Alice Glass, his attention was completely fixed on her. The difference between Lyndon and the other powerful guests at Longley was immediately obvious and dramatic. The other politicians tended to be measured and cautious, speaking in low tones and moving with deliberate grace. Lyndon was the complete opposite. He spoke quickly and loudly, often invading others' personal space, grabbing their arm or lapel to emphasize a point. He did not talk about abstract policy, but instead spoke with a burning passion about his ambitions to fundamentally change America. He described his dream of bringing electricity to the poor rural areas of Texas and building modern highways to replace the dirt tracks that people still depended on. To many in the sophisticated Washington elite, this raw and aggressive enthusiasm seemed coarse and unrefined. But Alice saw something entirely different. Beneath his rough exterior, she recognized what she called a real fire, a genuine and powerful ambition that was not just for himself, but for the poor and forgotten people he had grown up with. She saw in him a primal force, a relentless will to get things done that was missing in the more cautious men around her. The attraction between them was immediate and powerful, a connection that was both physical and intellectual. They were both tall, intense individuals whose personalities filled the room, and their meeting was later described as the meeting of two hurricanes. The situation was intensely complicated because Charles Marsh, Alice's partner, had invited Lyndon to Longley with the intention of becoming his political patron, and Lyndon's wife, Lady Bird, was present for the entire weekend, a quiet observer to the unfolding drama. Yet, the presence of their respective partners could not suppress the magnetic force pulling Lyndon and Alice together. Throughout the weekend, they continuously found ways to steal moments alone, disappearing into the vast library to discuss books and political ideas, or walking along the long corridors of the mansion where Lyndon would share his boldest plans and Alice would listen, analyze, and offer her sharp insights. By the time the weekend concluded, an unspoken agreement had been forged between them. It was the beginning of a passionate love affair and a formidable political alliance that would last for 25 years, a secret that was established and nurtured right under the noses of the two people they were betraying. The secret architecture of a 25-year affair. The way Lyndon Johnson and Alice Glass managed to sustain their relationship for a quarter of a century without igniting a public scandal was a masterclass in deception and bold strategy. Their secret was not to hide in the shadows, meeting in cheap motels or dark alleyways, but to conduct their affair in the most open and audacious way imaginable. They turned Longley, the very home Alice shared with Charles Marsh, into their private playground, hiding their relationship in plain sight. They created a strange and complex family of four, with Lyndon and his wife Lady Bird becoming frequent and welcome guests at the Virginia estate. Together, the two couples would dine, socialize, and discuss politics, presenting the perfect image of close friendship and mutual admiration to the outside world. This entire arrangement was a carefully constructed performance, a stage play where all the main actors knew their lines and played their parts to perfection. Lady Bird Johnson was aware of the affair, though the exact extent of her knowledge remains unknown. Those close to the family believed she understood the true nature of the bond between her husband and Alice, but chose to remain silent. Lady Bird was a pragmatic woman who understood that Lyndon's political career was the single most important project of their lives, and she knew that a public scandal could destroy everything they had worked for. Therefore, she quietly endured the humiliation for the greater good of his ambition, accepting Alice's permanent place in her husband's life. The connection between Lyndon and Alice, however, went far deeper than a simple physical affair. She quickly became his most important and influential secret advisor, the hidden mind behind many of his most significant political moves. Whenever Lyndon had to deliver a major speech, he would turn to Alice to help him refine his words and sharpen his arguments. When he faced a difficult political opponent, it was Alice who would help him devise a strategy, analyzing their weaknesses and outlining how to defeat them. She was instrumental in helping him decide who to trust and who to bring into his inner circle. To maintain their constant communication without being discovered, they developed a secret system, often using trusted friends to act as couriers for their voluminous correspondence, and reportedly using a simple code in their telephone calls to discuss sensitive matters. Their entire relationship was a carefully managed operation designed to maximize influence while minimizing risk. Alice's own motivations were complex, as she was a woman driven by a desire for real, tangible influence rather than public recognition. She had no need to see her name in the newspapers. What she craved was the ability to shape events from behind the scenes. By serving as Lyndon's secret confidant and strategist, she achieved exactly that. She willingly accepted a life in the shadows in exchange for wielding true power. Both she and Lyndon were brilliant actors in this long and deceptive game. A game where the stakes were nothing less than the career of one of America's most consequential political figures. The Pygmalion effect. When Lyndon Johnson first entered the sophisticated world of Alice Glass, he was very much a rough, unfinished product. He embodied the stereotype of a rural Texas politician. He was loud, crude in his manners, and lacked the polish expected in Washington's high society. He had a habit of eating with his hands at formal dinners, wore rumpled, ill-fitting suits, and often dominated conversations by speaking loudly and interrupting others. His political style was similarly blunt, exemplified by his famous Johnson treatment, a tactic where he would use his large physical frame to intimidate opponents, getting uncomfortably close and talking incessantly until they surrendered to his will. It was an effective, if brutish, tool. Alice saw the immense potential hidden within this raw energy and set about the task of transforming him. She undertook a comprehensive process of refinement, turning the provincial politician into a statesman of national stature, a real-life example of the Pygmalion myth, where a creator falls in love with their creation. Her first focus was his external appearance, teaching him how to dress in finely tailored suits made from quality fabrics, and how to present himself with an air of authority. Next, she worked on his social graces, using the dinner parties at Longlea as a training ground to teach him proper etiquette and the art of sophisticated conversation, showing him how to persuade with logic and charm instead of just brute force. Most importantly, Alice sought to cultivate his inner world, introducing him to classical music, fine art, and the great works of literature and philosophy. She believed that a great leader needed a broad intellectual foundation and a deep understanding of history and human nature, pushing him to think beyond the narrow concerns of Texas politics. She also helped him refine his political instincts, teaching him to use his Johnson treatment more selectively and to master the more subtle arts of negotiation and alliance building. The result of her dedicated coaching was a stunning transformation. Lyndon Johnson became more polished, more confident, and incredibly skilled at navigating the complex corridors of power. When he rose through the ranks of the Senate, he did so as a master legislator, a man who knew how to dominate the institution not just with force, but with finesse. However, the Pygmalion story carries an inherent risk. When the creation becomes too powerful and successful, he may begin to believe he achieved it all on his own and may no longer feel he needs his creator. This dynamic planted the seeds for their eventual falling out. The reason: she stayed. Given her beauty, intelligence, and independent means, Alice Glass could have had any man she wanted, which makes her decision to remain Lyndon Johnson's secret lover for 25 years all the more remarkable. The core reason, confirmed by her own sister, was simple and profound. She was deeply in love. Lyndon was, by all accounts, the great love of her life, and their bond was an intense emotional connection that transcended politics and convenience. For many years, she held on to the hope that he would eventually leave his wife, Lady Bird, so that they could finally marry and make their relationship public. However, she underestimated Lyndon's cold political calculus. For him, every decision was weighed against its impact on his career. In the social climate of the mid-20th century, a divorce would have been political suicide, shattering the image of a stable family man that was essential for a national leader. Furthermore, he was financially dependent on Lady Bird's family inheritance, which had funded his early campaigns. He could not afford to lose her money or her public support. Faced with this inescapable reality, Alice made a pivotal choice in 1940 when she married Charles Marsh. This marriage was not an act of love, but rather a pragmatic surrender, an acknowledgement that she would forever be Lyndon's mistress, never his wife. Paradoxically, her marriage to Marsh solidified her affair with Johnson. It removed the constant pressure and unfulfilled hope of a future marriage, providing the perfect cover for them to continue their relationship under the guise of being family friends. She stayed not for power or money, but for a love so profound that she was willing to build her entire life around its secrecy, accepting her role as the invisible force behind the throne. The widening divide. The 1950s marked the zenith of Lyndon Johnson's power in the U.S. Senate, where, as Majority Leader, he became known as the Master of the Senate. This immense authority began to change him profoundly, inflating his ego to monstrous proportions. His infamous Johnson treatment grew more extreme as he became more accustomed to getting his way through intimidation and bullying. The humble student who had once eagerly absorbed Alice's lessons was replaced by an arrogant and self-centered man who demanded absolute agreement and grew impatient with her critiques. For the first time, serious cracks began to appear in their relationship as she grew weary of his growing ruthlessness. His political fortunes shifted in 1960 when he failed to secure the Democratic presidential nomination and instead accepted the role of vice president under John F. Kennedy. This period was deeply frustrating for Johnson, who felt powerless and overshadowed by the young, charismatic president. The new position also created a physical barrier between him and Alice. Surrounded constantly by Secret Service agents and the press, their secret meetings became impossible, and he began to view his longtime confidant as a dangerous liability. Simultaneously, their political views began to diverge sharply. Alice was a committed liberal who believed in civil rights and opposed foreign military intervention, while Johnson was becoming increasingly hawkish. The woman who had once been his closest ideological partner was now becoming one of his critics, and the fire that had once united them began to fade. On November 22, 1963, the assassination of President Kennedy instantly elevated Lyndon Johnson to the presidency. In that moment of national tragedy, Alice may have felt a flicker of hope that the man she had molded for greatness would now rise to the occasion and lead with the ideals they had once shared. That hope was quickly extinguished by his decision to dramatically escalate the American military involvement in the Vietnam War. As the conflict intensified and the number of young American soldiers sent to die in the jungles of Southeast Asia swelled, Alice was horrified. She saw a generation of young men, many from poor backgrounds similar to Lyndon's own, being sacrificed in a war she believed was immoral and unwinnable. Her conscience would not allow her to remain silent. For the first time in their nearly three-decade relationship, she broke with him publicly, using her connections to voice her opposition to the war. For Johnson, who demanded absolute loyalty, this was the ultimate betrayal. He could not tolerate dissent, especially from the person who knew him most intimately. He viewed her opposition not as a difference of policy, but as a deep personal attack. The relationship that had survived decades of secrecy and complication was finally and completely shattered. Not by another person, but by a distant, tragic war that tore the nation and their bond apart. The final act. By the late 1960s, as the Vietnam War raged on, Alice Glass was consumed by a sense of despair and disgust. The man she had loved and helped create had, in her eyes, become a monster, a figure responsible for the deaths of tens of thousands of young Americans. Feeling that the legacy she had helped build was now irrevocably tainted by blood, she made a final, decisive, and destructive decision. She went through her home at Long Lee and gathered every piece of correspondence from her 25-year relationship with Lyndon Johnson. This collection comprised hundreds, perhaps thousands, of letters containing not only their most intimate feelings, but also a secret political history of the era, filled with his private thoughts, strategies, and confessions. She then took this entire archive, a priceless historical treasure, and burned it all to ash. This great burn was a deliberate act driven by two powerful motivations. First, she no longer wanted her name to be associated with him in the annals of history, feeling a deep sense of shame for her role in his rise. Second, and more importantly, she wanted to protect her beloved niece and the rest of her family from the stigma of being connected to the man she now viewed as the architect of the Vietnam War. In this final act, Alice Glass chose her conscience over her place in history, sacrificing historical recognition for personal peace and the protection of her family. She lived the rest of her life quietly, passing away in 1975 and taking her remaining secrets with her to the grave. This story leaves us with profound and unsettling questions. Was Alice Glass right to destroy such a vital historical record to protect her family and cleanse her conscience? And what does it say about a great leader when the woman who knew him best, who helped shape his every success, ultimately decided that his legacy was a burden so terrible that it needed to be erased by fire? After a quarter of a century as the most important woman in Lyndon B. Johnson's life, Alice Glass made her final judgment. She concluded that the man she had created was not worthy of being remembered in the way she had once known him, a verdict she delivered not with words, but with flames.